Welcome to Omaranger 004, and today I will be explaining the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home. But before I start, if you're here without seeing the movie and just want to know whether the big leak was true or not, then I'll just say up top that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are both in the film. Okay, so let's get to the video. To explain better, I will just call them by their actual names, as referring to them as Peter 1, 2 and 3. The movie picks up immediately after the events of Far From Home, with Peter's identity out there and he has to live with the repercussions of his newfound fame. It's mentioned that Nick Fury is in space for a year setting up secret wars. His name is cleared by none other than Matt Murdock. Tom's and his friend's life has been ruined by the court of public opinion, and their applications to MIT are rejected. The group can't get into any schools at all, and it's clear that even though they didn't do anything wrong, they've been framed alongside Tom. They then have to move into Happy's apartment. We met Dummy from Iron Man movies. We also catch Delmans in Queens, which was a deli Tom visits in Homecoming, and he also wears a t-shirt that Tony gave him in that movie. Their lives are all ruined though, and thus Tom goes to Doctor Strange in order to erase his identity from everyone's mind so that his friends' lives can have a normal life. However, his constant interrupting during the spell causes it to shatter the multiverse, and it brings across people from other franchises that know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. This includes a number of his enemies, most notably the Green Goblin, who is played once more by Willem Dafoe. To make matters worse, the spell doesn't actually work. They do change up some scenes from the trailers, namely the setup to the spell, and whereas the teasers had some corners of the internet believing that he was Mephisto, it's clear that Strange is just trying to help Tom as best as he can. Now the movie actually pulls from several comic storylines, and it includes elements of Civil War, One More Day, and also Happy Birthday. In the Civil War run, Spider-Man is unmasked for the entire world during a PR stunt to show the positives of the Superhuman Registration Act. This sent the Marvel Universe into a civil war in which Iron Man and Captain America went head-to-head over the Accords. Spider-Man ended up switching sides from Tony to Steve. But with his identity already out there, it put those around him in a lot of danger. Kingpin sent assassins after him, and during an attack they shot Aunt May and left her in critical condition. Desperate to save her life, Spider-Man went to Doctor Strange in a rundown Sanctum Sanctorum and asked him to cast a spell that would allow him to delve into multiple timelines and ask for help from every scientific mind. However, they all said there was nothing they could do, and thus Spider-Man turned to someone else. Mephisto showed up to tempt him, and he pledged to heal Aunt May, but in return her wanted Spider-Man and Mary Jane's love. Spider-Man and Mary Jane ended up sacrificing their marriage to save May and to make sure that no one ever came after those he loved again. He also stipulated that the world had to forget he was Spider-Man. Beyond that, the Happy Birthday storyline had Dormammu attacking New York, and Spider-Man interrupted a spell that Strange was casting, which opened up reality itself. Inside this void he came across two versions of himself from the past and future, which of course reflects the other two Spider-Men that we get in this entry. There are several Easter eggs hinting towards their arrival, and lots of Easter eggs that call back to previous movies. This includes Tobey's back being busted up, which in Spider-Man 2 was actually a nod to Tobey sustaining a back injury that meant he was almost recast with Jake Gyllenhaal. There's also a moment in which the Goblin's mask is left in the trash whilst he runs down an alleyway, which mirrors when Tobey did it in Spider-Man 2. Now, after the villains are brought across, Tom ends up going to an MIT staff member to convince her to let his friends in. Before he has a chance to plead his case, Dr. Octopus attacks and Tom ends up going head-to-head with him. During this battle, Otto actually slices Peter's tie off and the suit, and even cut tire callbacks to Spider-Man 3 when Tobey Maguire's version had the exact same thing happen. Tom manages to take control of his tentacles through the nanotech, overriding them, and thus he's able to subdue Otto. However, the Green Goblin arrives, but just before Tom can take him on, he's transported below the Sanctorum, where Otto is imprisoned along with the Lizard, who had a run-in with Strange. From this point on, Tom is ordered to capture the villains along with Ned and MJ. He finds Electro draining power out in the woods. Here Tom is helped by Sandman, but Tom ends up transporting them both to the prison. We catch up with Osborn talking to his mask like in the movies, but he ends up smashing it before fleeing to feast. The way this mask is left shattered does somewhat resemble the way that Tobey dumped his costume behind in Spider-Man 2, and you do kinda get the feeling that Osborn may have defeated the darkness within him. After finding him at the shelter, Tom is instilled with the idea that he has to help these people, and thus upon returning to the Sanctum and finding out they're gonna be returned to their realities so that they can die, he takes matters into his own hands. Tom ends up stealing the spell which is contained within a cube. This leads to a chase across the mirror dimension in which Tom bests Strange, steals his ring and leaves him trapped there. He sets out to cure the villains, and they return to Happy's home in order to use the machine that we saw in Far From Home to develop items that can save them. The first of which is a chip to replace the broken one in Otto's neck, and this will allow him to regain control of his mind. Tom develops a device that can draw energy from Electro, and along with Norman they start to work on removing the Goblin. However, this ends up taking over Norman, and he talks Electro into destroying the device so that they can become gods in this reality. Electro steals the arc reactor from Iron Man 2, which is powering the workbench. Sandman leaves and the Lizard runs off into the night. With news cameras at the scene, Otto flees too, which leaves Tom and the Goblin going head to head. Osborn easily bests him, and in the lobby he knocks May down with his glider before launching a pumpkin bomb at her. Initially she seems fine, however in the wreckage she collapses and dies after saying, "With great power comes great responsibility." Happy is arrested at the scene. He screams, "Run, Peter! Run!" and then Tom flees to a rooftop where he spent a lot of time with MJ away from the world. Now across town, Ned and MJ are desperate to find him, and using Strange's ring they manage to open a portal upon saying that he wishes he could find Peter Parker. This not only brings across Andrew but later Tobey when the spell is repeated, and this scene is one of the most impactful ones I've seen in a cinema for a long time. It was so good seeing them back, and Garfield especially knocks it out the park throughout the movie. In the comics, Ned Lee became the Hobgoblin. It does seem like they're doing something different with him, and that he'll become a sorcerer at some point or not. After getting some lip service to Harry Osborn, he does vow to never turn on Tom, but in the aftermath of the ending, who knows? Tobey, Andrew and Tom have some incredible scenes together that touch upon Gwen, Uncle Ben, their web shooters, and there's even a reference to the Spider-Man pointing meme. Together they create cures for the villains and announce through the Daily Bugle that they'll be at the new and improved Statue of Liberty. This is where it all goes down, and together the Spider-Men work with one another to administer the cures. These include the one seen at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man, a reverse collider for Sandman, and Otto shows up to help out with Electro. Everything's coming up fine until the Green Goblin arrives. He ends up grabbing the cube and putting a pumpkin bomb in it, which blows reality wide open, and we start to see several villains entering the MCU. This includes the likes of Rhino, either Scorpion or a Spider Slayer, and there's several amongst this that would completely decimate the world. Ned and MJ are pulled into the fray, but Andrew gets his redemption when he saves MJ from falling, which is something that he couldn't do with Gwen. Tom almost kills Goblin for what he did to May, but at the last second he's stopped from ramming his glider into his face by Tobey Maguire. Tobey gets stabbed, but Andrew tosses the cure to Tom, who injects him and then cures him of his dark side. However, reality is still tearing apart, but Tom realizes that if Strange casts the spell to make everyone forget he's Spider-Man, that this will stop reality from ripping open. The villains and their Spider-Men have mended their relationships, and they'll now return to their own universes to escape the deaths that were bound to happen with them. May very much instilled in Tom the idea that if he saves one person he saves everyone, and thus he's stopped a lot of heartbreak from happening in other realities. He has a tearful goodbye with MJ and promises that he'll come and tell both her and Ned about himself so that they can remember him once more. The entire world ends up forgetting that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and thus Peter is left on his own. He ventures out to where MJ works one day, and the emotion in this scene is absolutely incredible. It's clear he has this entire thing planned out and that he knows exactly what he wants to say, but when Ned enters and the pair talk about MIT, he starts to have second thoughts. MJ even has the black dahlia necklace that he bought her in Far From Home, but she simply can't remember that they've ever met. After noticing a band-aid covering a cut that she got at the Statue of Liberty, he decides to leave both her and Ned be, as she seems happier and being close to him will only put her in danger. This was very much a point that was brought up at the end of the first Raimi film, and Tobey had to turn away from the person he loved in order to spare them any pain that his lifestyle would cause. It's completely devastating, and it's arguably one of the most painful endings for an MCU movie ever. To make matters worse, Tom visits May's grave, and he's then joined by Happy, who doesn't recognize him either. However, he alludes to Tony and what May's death meant, which pushes Tom on even though he's now at his lowest point. We end up with him moving into his first apartment by himself. Though there's no Mr. Ditkovich there, he'll clearly start using this as a base of operations, and he'll continue to help people. Tom is picking up police frequencies, and he's also made his own costume, which looks just like the classic suit from the comics. It's a bittersweet ending that shows Tom has been inspired by those he loves, and though they've forgotten what he meant to them, he hasn't forgotten what they meant to him. Thank you all for watching. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more videos about your favorite comics, movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.